Okay, hey, there we go. Going live now. If you are watching this live, thank you for joining us. If you're not seeing this, of course, you're not even here. But it looks like we might have some streaming problems, but we're going to go ahead and go for it anyway. On Wednesday, December 2nd, 2020, Jenkins LTS 2.263.1 was released. Today, I've got Mark Waite with me. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Darren.
Hey, there we go. There's
I'm
the
here.
audio. Okay, cool. And just in case people don't know who we are, my name is Darren Pope. I am a developer advocate. Say that twice fast. For CloudBees, and Mark is the Jenkins documentation officer for the Jenkins project. Right? Close enough?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm worried about leading and guiding Jenkins documentation.
That sounds like a really fun job.
It actually is surprisingly fun. There are lots of people who contribute to Jenkins documentation all over the world.
And we'll get to that a little bit later of how you can contribute to Jenkins. But the new LTS came out at the time we're doing this live stream. That was yesterday, December 2nd. Was this a big one?
No, actually, this is a somewhat typical LTS. They're usually pretty calm. They've got some interesting things. They've got some bug fixes. They've got some new features, and it comes out about every 3 months. So, but this one was a relatively calm and settled one.
Is this a bit of foreshadowing?
It is, yes, because in March of 2021, we've got a bigger one coming out, and we'll talk about that as we come to the end of this session. We want to spend some time talking about what's coming in March, not just what's in this release.
Right. Now, in case you don't understand the difference of how maybe Jenkins releases, let's talk about, there's two basic release cadences for Jenkins. There's LTS, which we're going to talk about in a moment, and then there's weekly. Let's spend just 30 seconds real quick on weekly. What is weekly?
Yeah, so weekly is generated every Tuesday. It is generated on a clock. We always do it on Tuesday. The Tuesday release includes everything on the master branch for that at that point in time. And so work accumulates, we release it every week, boom, boom, it comes out. We write a change log for it, we describe it, users deploy it, and they give us feedback, but it's much more likely to have new things in it, and it may in fact sometimes have surprises in it. That's just the nature of every release, of a cadence of releasing every week.
Would you like to define surprise, please?
Yeah, so sometimes people detect that, oh, something changed that I needed, and that change caused something to behave differently than I expected. A UI change or a change of some function that talks to some other system.
Okay. I was hoping you would be a little more blunt. I'll go there since you're officially
okay.
Things can break.
Yes.
Weekly is considered to be experimental. Is that a true or false statement?
I wouldn't call it experimental. There are plenty of people who use weekly all the time, and they use it consistently. Okay. And it is generally surprisingly capable. It doesn't break as frequently as other development streams may break, but you're right that it is significantly less stable than the stable train, the long-term support release.
Well, and then let's just talk about that. What is LTS about?
Yeah, so the Jenkins long-term support release is selected about 4 times a year. So once every 12 weeks, we select a new baseline release. And that baseline release is then tested for 2 weeks as a release candidate. Then we release it as the .1. It therefore then lives for a month, and we release an increment to that, which is the .2. Then another increment to that a month later, the .3. And those 3 month, that 3 month sequence then will be followed again by choose a new baseline, and on that new baseline, do a .1, .2, and .3 again.
Yep. Very simple, very easy. And on rare occasions, you might see a .4.
Oh, yeah, sometimes we do a security release that may require a .4, or well, we had one 6 months ago where I made a mistake in the release process, and we actually had to discard a release and say we're going to do another one because of Mark's mistake. Mistakes happen, and sometimes we've even gone as far as a .5 once. It's not dismaying, it just happens.
Yep. So, and by the way, if you are here with us live, and you have questions or comments, you can put them over in the chat, just right over next to Mark. Unless you're on mobile, then it will be down below both of us. And we're going to go ahead and get into now some of the bigger items that came out of the 263.1 release. I'm going to leave off the leading 2. Just because 2. has been around now for since August 2016. Is that when 2x first came out?
Yeah, so it's been
roughly
260 weeks, right? So 260 weeks is about 5 years. So 4 or 5 years. Yep.
Yep. So I'm going to bring up this first one. JDK 11 version check for Debian and Ubuntu. I got burned by this one.
So tell how it happened. I am curious. I'm always charmed by what surprises people.
So the way it happened for me is I was doing some testing on the Ubuntu's 2018 and 16, right? So I was going through all 3 of those lines, and I did the install, and it didn't start. And I was like, what is going on? And I finally take a look at it, and I do some debugging, and found that the oh, help me, what's it called? It's not the initd file, or it was the initd file that had the problem. So why don't you explain that just a little bit more in detail? Because I was getting ready to put in a issue and all this other stuff, and then I went back through the weekly logs, and it's like, oh, it's already been taken care of.
Right. So what happened was we had a mistake in the script we used to check the LTS, the Java version number. We were looking for a Java version that was exactly 3-digit sequence, 11.0.9. 1.8.0. Our mistake then was that we didn't check for that 4th position, and that 4th position now with JDK 11, they had to roll it one more time. It's now 11.0.9.1. And we had several users who were running JDK 11 successfully on Debian or on Ubuntu, and all of a sudden they updated the Java version, and their Jenkins installation stopped. It no longer would start. The answer was we did a fix, and that fix is included in 263.
Yep. And I tested that yesterday when it came out, and it's like, oh yeah, it all works fine now. I got around it by just fixing my initd. Once I figured out what was going on, it's like, okay, I'll do a hack, and then I'll just wait for 263.
And that is a perfectly reasonable thing. Some Jenkins users may need to stay back 1 or 2 releases, but they want the latest Java. And so they may have to do the same exact thing you did.
Yep.
It's perfectly valid.
Now, right now, both JDK 11 and JDK 8 are the supported JDKs for Jenkins, correct?
That's correct.
And typically it's hotspot, or are there other flavors that
we
test?
Does that come in? So we test exhaustively with hotspot. We have colleagues actually at IBM who do testing with OpenJ9 as well. But hotspot is the default, and it's the one that we test the most.
Okay. So number 1, if you're on Debian or any of the Ubuntu flavors, that's now been fixed.
It has. That's right.
And if you were still on JDK 8, you didn't know that it happened.
Exactly. Right.
That still worked.
And the vast majority of Jenkins installations are still on JDK 8. Now, JDK 8 someday in the future will no longer be supported by the Java vendors. They've given us many years yet before it's going to be unsupported. But people should consider, is it about time that I switch to JDK 11? JDK 11 is mature, it's stable, it's reliable, and good performance. So there's not a compelling reason that I see to stay on JDK 8. You're welcome to go to JDK 11. It works great.
Yep. Okay. Enough about that one. Next up, SystemRead is now GA.
Right. So this one we introduced in February of 2020. the beginnings of this concept through a Jenkins enhancement proposal. The idea is that a Jenkins system that is configured as code is best if we don't let the users change its configuration. And that makes sense that, okay, if it's configured as code, you should go into the code to change the configuration. And so if we leave the UI editable for administration, they may change the configuration and then grumble when the next restart resets their configuration back and takes away the thing they just changed. So system read permission allows the administrator to declare that their configuration pages should be read-only but visible. So they don't take permission away from the administrator. They're still an administrator, but they're going to hide the ability to change the settings of that administrative page. It's an elegant technique that allows you to shift from thinking you're going to edit your configuration by clicking on the web page to agreeing with your users and administrators. No, we change configuration of Jenkins through code.
And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, that is called JCASC, or Jenkins Configuration as Code.
It is, right. And it's actually oftentimes used with Jenkins Configuration as Code and the job domain-specific language, the job DSL plugin. There are people who manage an entire Jenkins installation from Git commits into an administrative repository.
And it really works, people.
It does. There are a lot of very happy. I'm one of the very happy people using configuration as code. I love what I get from configuration as code.
Absolutely. Okay, here's the next one that was pretty big. I'm going to let you explain this one because I read the bug reports and was still scratching my head. Even though I understood it, I couldn't understand it well enough to explain it.
Well, and so this is a fun one for me because this is effectively bringing Jenkins SSH implementation closer to the modern era. SSH is a secure shell system. Its job is to allow secure communication between two endpoints, a client and a server. In the particular case, this is talking about Jenkins acts as the server, and the client is making a request to perform a command line operation, maybe a command line based create a job or a command line start a job. However, what Jenkins would allow, it was allowing key exchange algorithms in SSH, which have been deprecated by the people who know SSH security very well. They've said, you should avoid these particular algorithms because they're no longer strong enough to justify you using them. Likewise, for the Mac algorithms, the idea is that there's just too great a risk for them to continue allowing these algorithms to be used. Now, most users will not encounter this at all. You need to be using a command line interface, talking through SSH to Jenkins to see it, and you would need to be using some really old Linux variant or really old SSH implementation. And when I say really old, I suspect unpatched CentOS 6 might show you this, but I doubt anything newer than that. And certainly the patched versions of all the operating systems should never show you this. The moral of the story for me is be sure you patch your operating system anyway, right? Your OS deserves patches, particularly for things that are sensitive like SSH.
Okay. I could go down a rabbit hole there. I'm not going to. The next one. Setting the cross-origin opener policy. This just sounds like miserable web browser things.
It's a good thing to say it's a miserable web browser thing in the sense that it's trying to protect users from being attacked by someone who is maliciously misusing web pages against them. This is a Mozilla recommendation that this cross-origin opener policy should be set to same origin so that certain classes of web-based attacks cannot be launched against your Jenkins server. So this is a nice benefit of the Jenkins security team caring very deeply that they want to safeguard Jenkins users against someone maliciously misusing a Jenkins server in a way that it should not be done.
Now, if you're running your Jenkins server out in the open on the internet, okay, ci.jenkins.io, that's one thing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's out in the open. But if you're just running yours out in the open without any kind of security around it,
oh yeah, then
you need to
you're being
rethink
foolish, right?
Yes,
You're being
that's what I'm
foolish.
getting to.
And that is absolutely correct. You should, if you're going to place a Jenkins server on the public internet, you absolutely must secure it. It is a gateway to execution resources that you own. You should not give away the keys to your gateway, right? You should not allow unlimited execution on your equipment. So absolutely, if you're running a publicly accessible Jenkins server, please secure it.
We could go on for at least 30 minutes about that.
Yes.
I'm not going to. Not
Okay.
today, anyway. This next one was sort of the last of the big things, right? And it's talking about API token automation. When the API tokens were changed, when was that? Over a year
I
ago?
think we're 6 months, 12 months ago, the
Yeah.
API token system was introduced. Yeah.
Right. Well, okay. So it used to not be a token based. It was you could look at your token and reverse out your token.
Mm.
That right? Before we put the API token, or am I thinking about? I'm talking about the user token.
And I don't know for sure. I apologize, but I'm not confident one way or the other. I know that the API token system we have now is intentionally allowing a user to have a token which is independent of their password.
Right.
And can be generated by Jenkins. So it's not a predictably generated.
Oh.
It doesn't have the usual risks of generated passwords. It's generated by a cryptographically strong random number generator. And what this particular feature does is now allows a user, an administrator, to define that they want that API token to be generated during the startup phase so that they can use it later. And it's a powerful thing if you're deploying multiple Jenkins servers where you say, I want to start up a new Jenkins server. It needs to communicate with this other external system, but I want that token to be generated at startup so I don't have it stored inside my Git repository. I don't have it stored in my configuration as code. I'm not risking that someone will steal that API token from a permanent storage location that exists outside of Jenkins. This thing is generated live when Jenkins starts.
Cool. So that's sort of the wrap of 263. Now there's still more things there. In fact, I am going to share my screen real quick. If I can find the right screen, there it is. And so here's the changelog that has all of those things. And you can see here that there were also some changes since the weekly of 263. Let's talk about that for just a second. So 263 went on to become 264. But yet there were still fixes that needed to be done in order to get our .1, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, you understood it exactly. You described beautifully.
Okay, good. See, I do pay attention sometimes. So here was this big Debian, it had a big red ball on it. If you don't understand what the colors of the balls mean, there is a legend for that at the bottom. I'm not going to scroll all the way to the bottom because it's a long page.
Yeah, I thought it was actually at the top, but it's.
Or is it the top? Oh, it is at the top.
Yeah,
You're right. I'm wrong. So there's the legend in case you don't understand what these things mean. But anytime you see a big red, that's usually a good one. Bad that it was there. Good that it's now resolved.
Right.
One of the other things that I do want to call out.
So Darren, before you leave that page, I wanted to beg for one more item on it. Right below the phrase, what's new in 2.263.1, there are three icons that indicate weather status. And if you hover over one of those.
Yep. I'll blow this up a little bit. There we go.
So when you hover over that one, if you were to click on that, it will add one. There you did. It adds one to the count of people who say, this worked well for me. Now, if you hover over the one next to it, the cloud, what it will show is a pop-up text that says, oh no, I had notable issues. If you now click on it, it prompts you for a bug ID. And if you were to enter a bug ID, now please don't, I do not want to taint the data, but we accept any data. You enter that number and it will remember that and it will record it on this page so that we can use it as a Jenkins project to identify which bugs affected which releases most severely. Now, if you look at the next one, the cloud with the lightning bolt, this says I had to revert. And again, you just put in the bug number there, but those are a great way for users without having to log in, without having to authenticate in any way. They can tell us their experience quite quickly with this release. And we use this in particular, we use this with the weekly releases because before we choose an LTS baseline, we consult those icons very carefully to see, is this particular weekly nice and stable?
And keep that in mind for just a second, because I do want to go back to that, how we choose an LTS. But before we do that, I want to show one more miscellaneous thing that happened in this release on the 2nd. Let me log in here real quick. Not so quick. We now have dashboard up here in the upper left-hand corner. That's been Jenkins for...
Only 15 years. Okay, only 11
years.
years. Only 11 years since before it was another name. So
correct, yes. And then also the other thing, if you did, and this is a very fresh installed Jenkins controller, this middle section is now new.
Right. Yeah, the user experience special interest group has been doing an amazing job of iteratively improving the Jenkins user experience. And this is one of the results of their improvement. They realized that a first-time user, when presented with Jenkins, may not have realized which were the things that were most important for them to do. And create a job and configuring an agent are the crucial steps that new users of Jenkins should be considering. So they made it very visible here and very, very easy to understand what you should do.
Yep. So those are two things that weren't listed on the changelog, not explicitly, but still good pieces of information.
Right. And that hints that sometimes we intentionally, in this case, we intentionally don't include every change in an LTS changelog. So this change was in our lists, and we intentionally considered and said, no, this is probably not a big enough change compared to the other changes.
Right. Okay. Now let's go back to that point that we were just talking about a moment ago. If I can find my mouse and go back to here. We were talking about the selection of an LTS. Now 263 was chosen as the LTS that was released at the time we're doing this yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Why was that?
Oh, it was chosen because it's very stable. Mm-hmm. It had good user feedback, and it was a good place for us to draw a line in the sand for the release. Now that line in the sand was important because the release after it has significant new additions, has significant new changes.
And the significance of that, and I'll go ahead and go back to the share here. There was a blog post that you posted on November 10th. So if you've been watching the blog on the Jenkins.io site, you would have already seen this. Here are the 4 bigs.
Right, and these four items are actually quite impressive additions, each in its own right. So first, the configuration user interface changes. Jenkins, since its very beginning, has used HTML tables to perform layout. And HTML tables for layout are great if you've got a nice wide screen. They work just fine. However, many of us now are on tablets or on our phone trying to do something. Yes, my phone, and I don't have a wide screen. And a table-based layout on those narrower screens is uncomfortable and painful. Well, a year ago, we had a pull request that was submitted proposing to change from tables to divs. So instead of using an HTML table, we'll use an HTML div layout element. And that change spent a year developing, refining, assessing compatibility before we allowed it into a weekly. Now, we knew even allowing it into a weekly with 1,700 Jenkins plugins that there were going to be things we hadn't yet seen. And we were right, there have been. And so 264 through now 269 are helping us identify the problems related to tables to divs, find the plugins that have those issues, and let us fix them. So that was that, and that's just one of these three. It's a most interesting and useful change. It makes the UI much better to use div-based layouts. I love the new UI, but there are some plugins that still need fixes.
Some, yes. We'll leave it at some.
Yeah, it's with a plugin ecosystem like Jenkins, it is inevitable there would be plenty of plugins that will need changes, right?
Yeah. Let's move to the next one that's actually in this list, which is a little bit out of our order. Acegi to Spring Security. Why is this a big deal?
So Jenkins has had a security framework that was based on a predecessor of the Spring Security framework for many, many years. The problem with having it based on that predecessor is it shows up in many security scans as, oh, this is a problem. You're using this old component. And many of the concerns about that old component were already addressed in the Jenkins code base by careful and detailed analysis. However, we don't want to be carrying around the baggage of old, unmaintained components. So as part of this, a team of engineers has moved from the old framework to use now Spring Security and a current release of the Spring Security framework. So that change is at the core of Jenkins' security model. And it's actually been surprisingly capable. It did require several plugins to be changed in addition, and there are still a few plugins that have yet to be changed to adapt to it. But this hyperlink will give you a link to guidance and a list of plugins that you can use to assess it. I've been quite pleased with this one in terms of how smooth it's been relatively. It's a major change. Basically, we're modernizing the underlying component in one big jump. And the modernization looks like it's been quite successful.
Good to hear. Let's move to the next one. XStream Unfork.
Yeah, and this one is another case of modernizing a core component. Jenkins depends very heavily on the ability to write XML data to the disk and read it from the disk in a process that Java calls serialization. That reading and writing of disk was done with this library called the XStream library. Well, many years ago, the Jenkins project needed some capabilities in the XStream library that they decided to fork a copy of it, so create their own private copy of the XStream library and use the private copy. That private copy met their needs, but it now has version numbers that look like it's old and out of date. This change said, no, we're going to set aside that Jenkins private copy of XStream, and we're going to instead use the current maintained and up-to-date version of XStream that the original authors are still maintaining. It required some changes because there were some use models in Jenkins that the upstream authors were not willing to accept, and those changes have been made, and it's now available in weekly releases of Jenkins.
Okay. And finally, I thought jQuery was dead.
Well, and I am the wrong person to talk about the lifespan of JavaScript libraries. I am delighted to have a JavaScript library available, and jQuery is one. In this particular case, jQuery was used inside the Jenkins core and was delivered as part of Jenkins core, but the library version that we were delivering was dramatically out of date. And so the jQuery upgrade that's been done here has moved us to the current version of jQuery. So these last three that we've described are all paying off some technical debt that had accrued in the Jenkins project, modernizing key components so that consumers can be confident that, yep, it's the best version of that library that's available.
Cool. And one other thing too, just for another note, is Jesse Glick had also posted on the same date another blog post about the Spring and XStream changes. So
exactly. And Jesse's blog is brilliant in terms of its technical content, its precision, and its guidance that if you find an issue related to one of these things, here's how you report a bug so that you can help if you detect something you think may be related to XStream compatibility or to the Spring security upgrade. This gives great guidance on how to report issues, how to see if others have found issues.
right. And again, both these are, I'm not sure which one maps to which, but 227, is that the Spring one?
It is.
Okay, so JEP 227 is for Spring security, JEP 228 is for XStream. So if you're testing weeklies, this is where you report the issues.
Absolutely.
Okay. One more thing. Today, since we are doing this live, today is December 3rd. It is December 3rd, right? Yes, it is.
It is.
There was actually a security release today.
There was.
There was. And
Yeah.
I actually have the notes for that.
Good.
So there were, for Chaos Monkey plugin, there were a couple of problems. And CVS, you're still using CVS?
No. Careful. There are plenty of places in this world. In fact, I think the OpenBSD operating system is still maintained on CVS. Therefore, yes, there are people who care very much about CVS and who are really security sensitive, actually.
Yeah. But still, it's fun to poke at.
At
least it's not RCS, right?
Yeah, CVS is not all sorts of other things like SCCS that preceded both of those, right?
Yes. Okay. Shell I'd actually never heard of, but then there was this plugin installation manager tool. Again, the links for this will be down in the description of this video. If you're using any of these plugins, or if you're using the plugin installation manager tool, go and read this and understand what was released in today's security update. It is important.
Yeah,
and that's all I'll say about that.
Well, so I'm gonna espouse more why people should use plugin installation manager tool. So if you're a Docker user, if you're consuming a Docker image, you probably need to install a set of plugins to get your Docker image ready. And for the longest time, we had a shell script that would download the plugins, but did not actually know all of the rules and all of the definitions that Jenkins core uses to decide if a plugin is valid in its context or not. The plugin installation manager tool is a project that came out of Google Summer of Code 2019, where a Google Summer of Code student created a Java implementation that uses the Jenkins rules to decide if a plugin is valid or not for the current Jenkins, for a specific Jenkins installation. It will resolve dependencies. It will safety check that that the plugin you're downloading doesn't require too new of a Jenkins version, so it won't even load for you. Plugin Installation Manager is an amazing tool. We've added it now to the Jenkins install instructions, and we use it already on our own install page. It works great. And yes, you should use the current version of it, not older versions.
Yes. And if you watch the video that I did on installing Jenkins LTS onto CentOS 7, I did everything by hand, but in an upcoming video in that series, we're going to be using Plugin Installation Manager. And it's, even though you were talking about it in a Docker context, I'm just doing it on a VM.
Right, and it works great in both.
So great, yes. It
does. Well, we found, so to describe how to do a Jenkins installation for one of our tutorials on Jenkins.io, We wanted to install the entire Blue Ocean plugin suite and all of its dependencies. Okay, that gives you a nice UI.
Wait. Do you know the depth and the number of all the plugins
Yeah, in
of
that
Blue Ocean? Do you?
Yes, I think it was like 60 or 70, if I remember correctly. It's
19 levels of dependency. It was over 180 plugins total, including all the optionals. At last, that was probably about a year ago, and I know we've pulled out some since then, but it was a very large number.
And that highlights why Plugin Installation Manager is such a joy to use, because the command line that installs that is Plugin Installation Manager CLI -- plugins blue - ocean. That's it.
Yep.
And it will resolve all the dependencies recursively until they're all satisfied, downloads them all with the correct versions, ready to go. And Plugin Installation Manager is just delightful.
So let me ask a question, since I have you here live. The way I've been using it is I would first do a manual install to figure out what plugins I want to install, and then I would basically do a listing of my plugins directory, and then export that out to a file to where I could pipe that into Plugin Installation Manager. Is that too much?
No, that's perfectly valid as well. That is a great way to do it. That what you did, I would call it generate a good prototype and then codify the prototype. And codifying a prototype is a great way to do it, because you know it works in the prototype. Now, when you do it in the command line version, you can be quite confident it will also work there. Now, you didn't get the benefit of all of the dependency resolution, because Jenkins had already done the dependency resolution for you. But realistically, that's a great way to handle it. Now, you might say, oh, I'm now going to simplify the thing that I was storing and admit that everything that starts with the word Blue Ocean, I can delete except the top level one.
Right.
And those kind of things you have the option to do, but it's not required. You can take a full list of all your plugins and use those as input in the definition file that Plugin Installation Manager uses. Absolutely.
Yep. Okay. Cool. So that was a little bit extra for free today. That's not new in 263, but so here we're at 2.263.1. There's going to be a .2. There is going to be a .3. Said differently, there will be a January release. There will be a February release. We don't trust numbers, do we, Mark?
That's very wise. There will be a January release. There will be a February release, at least.
And then March. That's the dead of winter in a lot of places.
That is. It's a good time to be testing software. Actually, this period now is a great time to be testing software. Yep.
If you're not getting the subtext of what we're talking about right now, you need to be testing. When the March LTS comes out, you need to be ready for it. Where 263.1 wasn't too big, March is going to be big.
That's correct. And I like that. That's a very good way to say it. The table to divs transition, the Spring Security transition, the jQuery upgrade, and the XStream Unfork are all arriving in March of 2021. And so this is a great time now for someone to, guided self-interest, test with a weekly to see how their installation works, report the issues, allow the issues to be fixed so that come March, they've got them and it's ready to go.
Would you recommend, and if you choose not to answer, that's fine, would you recommend that if you're running any of the 2X release at this point in time, if you're still on 1X, that's a different conversation. But if you're on any of the 2X, should you go ahead and, in these next 3 months, try to get to 263 prior to March coming up?
Absolutely. This is a very good time to choose to update your Jenkins to 2.263. This is the right time. It's a good, stable, solid set of code. Come to 263 and invest the effort to prepare yourself for March, both. Absolutely. Because
otherwise, if you want to upgrade in March, again, that LTS number has not been picked yet, has it? No, of course not.
No, baseline will be selected at the end of January. Okay. So we've got about 6 more weeks between now and end of January 2021, when testing is especially valuable and finding things helps us a bunch.
So that holiday time you thought you had off, you don't have it off. You're going to be working on this. Seriously though, if you're way behind, if you're still down in the double digits of Jenkins, and you've been thinking about upgrading, you probably want to do it by probably February.
Right. That's a good point. You don't want, if I were running the Jenkins servers I'm running, I don't want to do a multiple LTS hop. It's better to do that hop towards something that's solid, 2.263. We know that the March release is going to have interesting and significant changes. So better to make that hop only from 2.263 to March.
And why is that important to only have just that one hop?
Well, for me, it's easier to diagnose my failures when I've got a narrow window of change. Others have had other experience on why they like to stay close. For me, it's okay, I can partition the failures much more readily if I've only got 3 months worth of changes that I need to think about.
Okay. Anything else about 263 or anything else that we've talked about today?
I encourage people to use it. It's a great set of code. It's doing a good job for lots of people.
Cool. Mark, thanks for hanging out. Mark will join us again probably in January once the probably .2 comes out. We'll call it the January release. Let's stop using numbers. It will probably I don't think we've ever burned a .2.
Yeah, I remember this is a project with 15 years of history. Yeah. Usually saying never in a project with 15 years of history is hard to do.
Probably true. Yeah. But anyway, and plus the numbering scheme was different before, was it? Has it always been the same numbering scheme?
LTS has always used three digit, and weekly has always used 3 sequences, and weekly has always used 2.
Okay. I think that's probably it. Okay, so Mark will join us again unless Mark dumps it off on somebody else. Did I say that? You would dump this off on somebody else?
I would love to join again. That would be
look,
fun.
In January, so I live in North Carolina. We have real 4 seasons. Mark lives in Colorado. He has 2 seasons, winter and construction.
I am sorry. I disagree wholeheartedly with you. I have 4 seasons. I think that pathetic thing you call winter is just an excuse to have maybe a little bit of cold rain. I actually get snow and regular bitter cold. But yes, you're right. We can dispute seasons all day long.
Yeah. But you do have to admit one of your seasons is construction.
Yes, absolutely. That's we don't attempt to repair roads at
now
0 degrees Celsius, right? That's nonsense. You don't try that.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Mark. We will see you again probably in January. And of course, the date hasn't been picked yet, right?
Actually, the date has been picked, and the release calendar is set. We did in this particular case agree as a Jenkins project that we would take a 2-week skip because the natural tendency would have been to deliver the release candidate on December 30th or 31st. And the project said, that doesn't make any sense. Let's take a 2-week slip and start fresh in the new year. And the cadence is now set, and it'll be every 12 weeks, a new baseline, and every 4 weeks, a new .x release.
Okay, so mid-January-ish. We'll probably come on about a day or 2 after the LTS is shipped. There's no way I'll bring Mark on the day that it's shipping.
Thank you.
It's just not going to happen. And for the people who have been here live with us today, thanks for hanging out with us live. Mark, I'm going to go ahead and boot you out. I will see you again in January. And for everybody else that's been watching this also on the replays, this is something that we're doing now. We're working with the community to help give you more information about what's coming or what's available in each of the releases. And just in case you're new to here, this is CloudBees TV. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe right now. Go ahead and click on that subscribe button, ring that bell, and that way you'll be notified anytime there are new videos that come in, Also, you can follow us on CloudBees Devs. And that's a new Twitter handle that we've got that will be coming through our developer advocacy program. Finally, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, my name is Darren Pope. All right. Thanks for everybody that was either here with us live today, or if you're watching this replay. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down in the comments, and we'll be glad to get back to you on those. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next video.